Hebrews chapter 11, it wasn't until Abraham was as good as dead that God made him the father of a multitude. Mm-hmm. And, we all need to come to that point where we recognize that God is God. He is sovereign. I am not. Christ is my life. I am not my own life. Apart from him, I can do nothing, John chapter 15. It's only from that place that we can live not knowing what the next step is, because we know the one who does know. And he's faithful. He never leaves. He never forsakes. Welcome to this week's episode of the His Hill Podcast. My name is Kelly Daugherty, and I'm your host. I want to thank those that have been writing, and for the local listeners who stopped me just to say how the podcast is being used in your life. We're getting those emails, we're getting the encouragement, and just want to thank you for taking the time to do that. I'm sitting here with our guest today telling him that we have people listening from all over the world. In some countries, I don't even know how they know about us, but people are logging on and listening every week. So really appreciate that, and with the encouragement that's come with that you've given, and our prayer is that the listener be encouraged to Jesus, to be fixed on Jesus. That's why we always want to, we end each podcast with that phrase, to keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, because we find that only there will we be ready or prepared to live, in whatever moment the Lord has brought us to. So I mentioned that we have a guest today. We're going to have an interview with a good friend of mine. We served on staff together for 14 years, and we both left staff. I've come back for part-time, but he still lives in the local area. But we're going to let him tell the story. Anyway, for those who are listeners who are alumni, most of you will know who this is. His name is Brian Stamness. He was a student with us, an intern. Then later he and his wife Regina came on staff, and thought it would be good to bring him on so people who don't know him could just hear how the Lord's worked in his heart, and then for people who do know him, just to know what's going on in his life now and his family's life. So Brian, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Brian, you and I have known each other for, oh my goodness, it has to be somewhere in the 30-year range, because we were 14 years together, and then I was gone for 6, and you were actually a student before that, and then you were an intern for a while. So we're getting close to that 30-year range, I think,
right,
Mark.
Right.
Yeah. Just sitting here with you, I'm reminded of a road trip you and I took together one time. It was after summer camp, and my family was in Canada, and I was going back to Louisiana to help my dad on a construction project, and you came with me. And you went out there and stayed with some alumni there, but we were driving out there and the car broke down.
Yes.
Just as we're pulling into Houston, it breaks down on the interstate. We were able to take the exit and coast up to the to the traffic light, and we jump out of the car, and now we're pushing it. Do you remember what happened then?
Oh yeah, somebody yelled out "Yabba Dabba Doo." It was memorable, very memorable.
Oh man, I remember you got a ride with some stranger to a parts store, got an alternator, and got back, and we were able to get that on there and make it to our destination. But every time I pass that exit, Arlene can testify to this, I'll just yell out "Yabba Dabba Doo," and I think you and I are the only ones that really appreciate the humor of that. But anyway, Brian, now tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in San Antonio. I grew up in a Christian family home. My dad and mom were both believers, and so they led me to Christ at an early age. And it was a very good family relationship that we had. I have an older brother and a younger sister. She came along a bit later on, so I was kind of mostly grown up in the interim of heading out of the house at that time. But nonetheless, so I grew up as a believer in Christ. I think, though, in the timeline of my mind, I remember vividly when I was in 7th grade, in that age group, I started to think, if I need to be cool, this is kind of how you talk at school and this is how you act. But I was also a Christian involved in the youth group. And so I was kind of two-faced at that point in my life. So I had the Sunday face on and the face at home. And then when I was at school, I tried to act cool and I had the flowery words that I would say and just thinking, but in my heart of hearts, I knew this isn't right. And I really, after that summer between my 7th and 8th grade year, I recall vividly that the Lord was saying, you are mine, and this is not a reflection of who I am. And so the Lord really convicted me that, words do matter and how I act and what I say. And so I just said, Lord, forgive me, and I want to be one who honors you in the way I talk as well. And so that next year in 8th grade, I recall some of the kids that I hung out with, they're like, hey, what's different? And it was a great opportunity to say, I'm a Christian, and these things are not true of who I am, the way I was talking. So that was just kind of a small little step in the right direction that the Lord was beginning to do in my life at that age.
Okay. And you guys, as a family from San Antonio, you attended a local church there, and you were pretty active in that church, right?
Yes. So we grew up going to a local church in San Antonio, and the head pastor, Steve Troxel, was also one of the teachers out at His Hill for, I believe, over 30 years. Yeah. He was here a long, long time.
Yeah, just recently passed away.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we had tremendous teaching, very biblically based sound doctrine that we were learning, and it was very instrumental. And growing up, I was involved in the youth group. The Lord challenged me through that. And of all things, Charlie McCall, the director here at His Hill, his brother David was my youth pastor. And that 9th grade year, not to skip too far forward in our storyline, but nonetheless, David kind of took me aside and he says, I want you to be someone who greets the other youth coming in on Wednesday night. And I was, at that time, more of an introvert and very quiet.
Wow.
And so it was a big stretch. I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
Wow. Anybody that knows Brian is probably shocked right now to hear that you were ever an introvert.
Exactly. So he it was very kind of him to do so. And he said, this is what I want you to do. And it completely changed who I was. It was a great challenge for me to go and greet the kids coming in, my peers, and it was very trajectory in how the Lord used that to continue to grow me.
Yeah. Now, I think you told me one time that it was while you were part of that youth group is when you started to go down the road of prankster.
Oh yes, there were many a good pranks, and we won't get into all the details. But if you ever need to have some good prank ideas, look me up. I'll give you some pointers.
Yeah, Brian has some hilarious stories of things that he's pulled, and at the years that I was the principal here at His Hill, Brian was one of the people on staff I had to kind of rein in, because every year the students somehow would find out that Brian has these great ideas, and he would always tell them things. And we had a lot of fun with it. We would just laugh about it every year. So you were part of the church there, and you were active in it. Dave McCall was your youth pastor.
Right.
And how did you end up hearing anything about His Hill?
So being that David, obviously being the brother and active in the church there at Wayside, and the connection that was there through Steve to His Hill and whatnot, and the brother, of course. So when I was graduating, Dave said, you should really consider going to His Hill as a student. And I remember vividly thinking, and I expressed to him as well, I said, I don't know that this is exactly what the Lord would have for me at this time. And I said, I really feel like the Lord's wanting me to go into studying construction, and maybe eventually the Lord would use that to go into ministry of some sort later on in life. I enjoyed doing cabinet making and those type of skills, but I felt like having a background in construction would be a good backup if I couldn't find a job doing cabinet making. So I went to the local college and got an associate's degree in home building. And so the Lord just had his perfect timing, and it wasn't right when I graduated. Now, that's normally when students come to His Hill, and I think it's a great gap year time, but it doesn't mean that it has to be that way. The Lord's timing is always best, and so I really knew that that's what the Lord was saying, is no at this time. I didn't think that there would be another time until sometime a couple of years later, and I can go into that story if you'd like as well.
Sure, yeah. Now, you were, go ahead and tell us that, but if I remember, you were kind of just at a crossroads, really not knowing what direction to go in. Is that right?
Yeah, so, obviously graduating from high school, I knew the next step would be to study at a community college and learn construction and just see what the Lord would do. I didn't have any direction at that point of where I was going to go, what I was going to do. It was very open-ended. And so the Lord said, well, the next thing to do is learn in construction, go to school. At that time, I was working for a company. We were installing home theater systems. It was for a gentleman that was at the church that we were attending there at Wayside. So I worked with him for 3 years, installing home theater systems, but studying to do construction work. And I really enjoyed the home theaters. It was a fun job. Got to play with what I called the toys of very expensive home theater systems, and at the technology has changed so much since then. But nonetheless, it was high tech and it was a lot of fun. But the Lord he doesn't let us get comfortable and static sometimes in things, and so His way of moving me on to the next thing was that I like to say that my boss was robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and I wasn't either of those guys' names. So my check would bounce higher than I could jump every other week, and so I didn't confront him about it. I just said, well, okay. I was still going to school at night and working full time during the day, and so I thought, well, as long as the next paycheck clears, then I'll just keep doing this. But that went on for at least 2 months, and I thought, this isn't going to be a good pattern to continue in. And so I like to think of it as somewhat prophetic, even though I didn't know it at the time. But I told my former boss then, I said, I really appreciate the job that you've given me, but I really feel like the Lord's moving me on to the construction that I'm learning for possibly going into missions in some sort of way. And so I need to go ahead and, this is my 2-week notice, I need to quit. That's, I believe, the only job I ever quit. Well, I take it back. I did move on from, my first job was staining furniture, working with chemicals, and I realized I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life either. Okay. So he was very good about it, and I didn't have to go into any details of the underlying reason why I was leaving. But I was pretty upset about it personally. I thought, this isn't the way it should be, and I was quite upset about it. So much so that I got a ticket that day because I was speeding. I was like, well, the Lord says, he was like, that's not good. You don't need to react in the flesh. So, but that was the way the Lord moved me on. And so I was still living at home with my folks. I was still going to school, and I was out working on my vehicle in the parking lot there, or right in front of the house. And the neighbor up the road came to me, and he said, "Hey, Brian, I've noticed that you've been parked out in front of your parents' house. What are you doing these days?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of in between jobs." And so he said, "Well, would you like to work for me?" And I said, "Sure. What do you do?" And so I was literally like, I will take any job I can. And so he said, "Well, I own a construction company with a partner of mine who has the other half of the partnership in the construction business. And so, yeah, would you like to work for me?" And I said, "Certainly." And so I went to work that following Monday, and And I ended up working for them for 3 years, and it was a great way that the Lord taught me the hands-on things that I was learning in school that the Lord later on would help me to use at His Hill.
Just let me interrupt you for just a second. I don't know if people can hear what's going on outside, but just so you know, we're in summer camp mode here, and right now the kids are going to the bathroom right next to us before they go to chapel for the evening chapel. So that's the noise that you may be hearing out there. But anyway, it'll go away in a second. But go ahead, Brian, please.
So, nonetheless, I ended up going to work for them, and it was a great experience. It was a great way to learn how to do the hands-on things that I was learning theoretically in school. They were not believers, and so it was also a great opportunity to be a witness for the Lord in the construction atmosphere. And you can imagine, you've heard stories, it gets kind of rough with some of the things that those guys talk and say. And so I felt like at times I was like the conscience to these men because they would start to tell a joke or something that was not good, and then they would stop and they go, "Oh, wait a second, no, we don't need to say that." So I was like, "Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you don't want to, because I don't want to.
I don't want to hear it.
I don't want to hear it." And so, but it was a great way to just be a witness for the Lord. And they would also specifically say, "Brian, I want you to go to this job because you're going to go into somebody's home and nobody's going to be there. And I don't necessarily trust these other guys. I don't want to get a phone call that somebody stole something." I said, "Well, thank you. I'd be glad to do that." And so I was working for them and really just felt like, yeah, this is what the Lord has for me. And I was finishing up school at that time and just continuing construction. I would begin my day usually around 6 in the morning and finish up school around 10 at night, and that was my schedule for a while.
Wow. Okay. And so you did that for 3 years. What brought you to the end of that?
Yeah, so during that time, I was still involved at Wayside Chapel. I was then kind of a youth leader of some sort, not in any paid capacity, but just helping out in the youth group. Still had a passion for that and being involved in youth missions, and often would go down on the Mexico mission trips that we would take with the church, with the youth. And so I was hearing about His Hill, occasionally that way, but really still again, not knowing much about it and not really thinking about it. And so I remember very vividly the occasion that happened that the Lord said, it was almost kind of like the Paul moment, the shining light type deal on the road. Yeah. It wasn't like that specifically, but it was in my heart. I was working in a very elderly person's home, working on fixing some sheetrock in the ceiling. And the Lord spoke to me in my heart and said, "You should go to His Hill." And I'm thinking, where in the world did that come from? Because it wasn't on my radar. I was not thinking about His Hill. I was not praying about His Hill. But the Lord said, "You need to go to His Hill." And I'm thinking, my goodness, what is that? So I, of course, contacted Dave McCall. Again, he was still the youth pastor. And I said, "David, is your brother still the director out there?" And he said, "Yes." And so I called up Charlie. And I said, "Can I meet with you to hear a little bit more about His Hill?" And he said, "Certainly." So the Lord worked it out even before making the phone call that I was going to need to be in San Antonio on the Tuesday that Charlie McCall had a dentist appointment. So I asked for an extended lunch from my boss, and he said, "Sure, no problem." And I met with Charlie, and I said, "I'd like to hear more about what you have there at the Bible school. What's that about?" And I told him what I did for work, and he very graciously said, "Well, what we can do is you can come to school and you can work for 17 hours a week, and we'll help you to get here." And that was very, very kind of him, because I didn't have money to set aside enough to just come free and clear it for tuition. And so, it was a growing experience. For me, it was like a vacation because it was just working 17 hours a week instead of 40 plus. But it was a great ministry to be plugged into and working. And I was a bit older at that time, so I would, still be working with the students during workday, but I was off to be on a project by myself or with the construction guy that was here at the time, just working on some of the buildings, doing what I was doing. So it was a great way that the Lord brought me to His Hill as a student, and it was also a great way to grow in my walk with the Lord. I knew that I knew the Lord Christ and as my Savior and Lord, and I was walking with Him, but it was just a really, for the first time, just a purposeful diving into God's Word like I'd never known and learned before. And so it was a great growing experience. And even just something as simple, I remember vividly, we were the typical household family. We would watch TV at night. Everybody just sit in the living room and watch TV. And somebody could literally get up and walk out and go out the door, and you wouldn't even know they left.
Oh, wow.
Because we were just watching TV. And so I purposed that when I was finished with His Hill, that I would not watch TV with my parents ever again, that I would take the time to just talk with them and not be distracted. And so I still don't watch TV over at their house whenever we go to visit. So that was something that was very, simplistic, but very vivid in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how the Lord brought me to His Hill.
What year was that you
That
came?
was in 95.
Okay, so in 95 you came to be a student, and you did 17 hours of work on top of that.
Right.
So you did the 5 hours of class a day, 17 hours of work.
Excuse me.
So you were a busy man during that time.
Yeah, and you'd see the students having the afternoons off, and they're playing and socializing and having fun, playing in the pool, and I'm like, I'm painting. Yeah, that looks so fun, But I knew that this is what the Lord had, so it was just another way to be disciplined to do the task that I knew I needed to do and not complain.
Okay. When was it that you came to understand that Christ is your life, not just a ticket to heaven, but?
I believe that would have been when I was in the youth group at Wayside when I was younger. I knew that change, that shift between 7th and 8th grade was very monumental in my heart. Something as simple as the way you talk, but I knew that was the direction the Lord was taking me.
Okay.
So He was saying, you're mine, and so you need to walk with me. And so that was a changing point.
So would you say your time, the year as a student here, was affirming to that?
Oh, absolutely. So again, there were things at His Hill that were, it was building on the elementary things of the Word, So that was, as the Word talks about the meat of God's Word, not just the milk. And so it was through learning the different things at His Hill that I really realized that it's more than just going to church and, on Sunday and saying you're a Christian. There was the actual walking with Him, talking with Him in prayer, and having Him be the one who, everything that I did, I wanted to be a reflection of Him. And so, and I'm obviously not perfect. There were many times where that wasn't the case, but God in His goodness would bring me back to Himself, and He continues to do so.
Okay. So you again, you did your year of Bible school, and then you were an intern after that, weren't you?
So yeah. So what happened was I stayed on. I was working. Finished up my school. As my school year, and then I volunteered to stay on as a counselor for 2 weeks. Not a very long time. I went through the training for 2 weeks, and then I stayed on for summer camp with the scholarship kids that would come for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then after that, I had obligations with Wayside, taking the youth down to Mexico for the Mexico mission trips.
Okay.
And then I had some other plans that took me through another couple of weeks that was going on through the summer. And while I was away on one of these trips, I thought, you know what, this is just kind of taking time that I don't need to necessarily spend doing what I'm doing. I should see if His Hill needs my help again. Because I had missed that atmosphere of serving and being around the people that were here. And so I asked to come back and see if there was one, the last week of summer camp to help out any way I could. And they said, sure, come on back. And that was the time, I don't know if you recall, we were actually working on the tower, changing some of the elements of the tower. We shifted a wall backwards.
Yeah.
We created a triangle part up there and different climbing walls.
Yeah, we changed the whole face of the climbing wall. Yeah. Back
when you and I were more fit,
yeah.
we could actually do that. And so that was a great time back. And I remember when I was working on that, you, Kelly, said, Brian, you should think about coming back as an intern. And I said, well, that's something I'll pray about it. And that's the easy knee-jerk Christian thing to say. Well, I'll pray about it. But I was like, I will pray about it and see. And so I was thinking on it and praying on it. And then a day or two later, Charlie came up and said, Brian, you should think about staying on as an intern. I'm thinking, well, we got two people here really wanting me to think about being an intern. So I'll pray about it. And what I always encourage everyone to do is not only did I pray about it, but I confirmed with my parents, what do you think? They got their godly advice and then some other mentors in my life. And I said, what do you think? And everybody was just affirming, that there's really no reason why you shouldn't say yes to this. And so I contacted that former boss, the one that was in construction. I said, I'm actually going to stay on, as an intern. I should say I went back to Charlie and said, yes, I'd like to do that. And he said, great. And so I went to my former boss, I'm a boss at the time, and said, I'm going to be gone another year. And he said, no problem. We'll have a job waiting for you when you get done. He said, no problem. And so I came and stayed as an intern. And so again, it was like a vacation because I was still working, but they had classes integrated in that was still stretching times and times of learning. We had a great core group of interns that I grew with and had great times with. Lots of stories with that. I had my roommate was from Costa Rica, and a quick story about that. So Lawrence, if you hear this podcast, I hope you don't mind me saying your first name. But anyways, Lawrence from Costa Rica, the land of love. He met his now wife here as well, and Kelly is her name. And Lawrence says to me, brother, because he's Hispanic in his talk, even though he's from Costa Rica. Anyways, he said, brother, I think I'm in love with Kelly. And look what I have. And he pulls out a wedding ring. And he's not even dating her for a week. And I said, Lawrence, put that in your sock drawer in the far back and don't bring that out for a long time. Trust me on this. Don't do it. He didn't listen. He proposed to her, I think, after the first week they were dating, and she said yes. And then she told Daddy, and Daddy said, Charlie, put her on a plane today. And he's like, whoa, what's going on? So anyways, they got it worked out. They now have 4 wonderful children, and they're up in Canada and just great people. But it was kind of comical in my mind. But so as an intern, when I was working here, Regina, my now wife, had come over from the Bible school that she had grown up in. It was more of a family camp at Schloss Klaus in Austria, the German-speaking center there. And so she, the Lord led her to come to His Hill. And I actually picked her up from the airport.
Oh, really?
In the prankster part of me, a quick story on that. I won't go too long. But in the parking lot was a red convertible Dodge Viper sports car in the parking lot. And so when we picked up her bags, you could go at the very end of the terminal back then. And I took her luggage out, and I dropped it down in front of the convertible Dodge Viper, and I said, "Here we are." And she says, "Okay." And it was like nothing. Like I said, "No, I'm just kidding. It's this blue bomb over here, you know." So I threw it in the little Ford something, and we waited for another student to come. She was from Canada. And so I thought, well, I failed on one. I'll try on the second one. So I did the same thing to her. Plopped it down, and she flipped out and thought, "This is the best thing." "No way, you got to be kidding me. This is going to be great." Going to ride it. No, I'm just kidding. It's this blue car over here. So, well, 1 out of 2. But anyways, so that's my first encounter with Regina. And but the sparks weren't flying then. I was just doing my job. That came later.
Yeah, so you guys, when did you start to date?
Well, we didn't actually start to date until January, the following semester, when everybody came back from the winter break. So we started noticing each other, and I won't go into all the detail, but one of my funny stories I like to say is I had a nice camera, and so I acted like I was going to take pictures of butterflies and who knows what, so I could wander my way down to where she was at the river, and we could talk. And so I used the camera as my excuse for happening to show up at the same place.
Good job.
Yeah, you know. And so, at one of the conversations we had, Regina said to me at that time, I remember it vividly, she said, "You know, I don't think I could ever live here in the United States." I'm thinking, that's not a good answer. That's not what I wanted to hear. But it was a way for me to understand that relationships are two ways. It's not only just my way or the highway. And if I really felt like this is what the Lord was eventually leading me towards, I need to be open to the idea maybe I would live in Austria. So we fast forward. We started hanging out in groups. And just before we were to leave on the Christmas break, Regina had mentioned that one of her dreams was to go to California after school. So Dr. Joe Martin, who's one of the teachers here, has been faithfully coming also for many, many years, probably 20 plus years, probably closer to 30.
Yeah.
I knocked on his door and I said, "Job, I have a question for you. There's this young lady that I'm interested in, Regina. We're not dating yet, but she wants to go to California. And I have just a little bit of money, and I have a car. What do you think?" "I think it's a good idea. I don't want her to go on a bus." And he goes, "That's a great idea. You just get married, have a great time. It's cheaper that way." And I'm thinking, we're not even dating. And so it was a reset of like, this is reality, Brian. So we didn't go to California, but we did get married. So just later.
And I don't know if you said this yet, but she's from Austria.
That is right. So she's from Austria. So so I had asked her when she came back, you know, I sent her off. She went to Canada, and she actually stayed overnight with the other 2 students that were going up, Lawrence being one of them. I arranged for them to stay at my grandmother's place. So she got to see my little baby pictures and whatnot. So that was good. So when she came back, I was kind of standoffish for a little bit because it was that final moment of like, is this really what the Lord is going to have or not? And so she was a bit confused because I was just kind of being a bit elusive. That didn't last long. And so we went on a trip, for a hiking trip out to out to Enchanted Rock in Fredericksburg. And on the way home, we're coming back up to his hill, and she said, "So is that a date?" And I said, "Yep." And she said, "Okay." And we've been dating ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you guys got married. Now, you lived in Austria for a little while.
Yeah, so Regina finished up her, we both finished, me in an intern and her as a student, and then she went back to Austria in June of 97. And so we had a long-distance relationship, which was really tough for me. She was doing fine. I was a basket case. And again, just to share our age a little bit, there wasn't the internet. There wasn't FaceTime or Facebook or any of that stuff. So it was literally, making phone calls,
Yeah.
and there's a 7-hour time difference. And so she was just getting up as I was going to bed. And so she wasn't a morning person. And so the conversations were not so long. And I'm thinking, she doesn't love me. But she was like, I know you're coming. So I took a 3-month German course at the local community college.
Oh, I remember you doing
so
that. Yeah.
that I could at least, converse with her folks a bit. And in December of 97, I flew over to Austria with a one-way ticket. And I said, well, okay, Lord, we're going to get married sometime. I don't know when, don't know the timeline. This is Abraham went out not knowing where he was going. I'm going to Austria, but that's about all I know. And so I proposed to her, and she said yes, thankfully. And although she was funny about when I was proposing, she said, do I have to tell you tonight? And I said, and she was pulling my leg. And I said, of course you do. And so she said, no, I'm kidding, of course. And so, but I had asked permission just shortly. I got over there in December and asked her father, and he said, I already said yes. I'm like, when? He said, when you wrote the letter asking permission to date her, I said yes for everything. I was like, okay, well, that's all right. So we were married in February of 98. And I went to work in March of 98 over in Austria, working for a custom balcony business. And then we started the process of working on paperwork because we realized not too far into our time there that it would be difficult for both of us to not need to work, for better lack of words. She would have to work and I would have to work in order to make ends meet, even though we were living at home with her folks.
Right.
So the Lord was working us back to to the United States, back to San Antonio. And so when we knew that was the case and we've gotten all the paperwork put together and the U.S. government said you need to be back in the United States by September or your visa is going to fail for her. So we made our plans. I called up my former boss in construction. I said, I know I came and left twice. Do you have that job still waiting for me? He said, yes, I do.
Wow.
So we arrived on a Saturday. We found an apartment on Sunday, and I went back to work on Monday.
Wow.
And the Lord had me work there for another year. During that time, though, and even prior, we had been praying and asking and said, Lord, we really, really, really would love to come back to work at His Hill. And we even inquired with Charlie, and he said, Brian, I'm sorry, there's just not a position here for you. And so we said, okay. But we kept praying and asking and praying and pleading with the Lord, we really want to work at His Hill. And He kept saying no. And so we, in March of 99, this timeline, I remember it vividly. So in March of 99, I finally said, okay, Lord, you've been telling me no all this time. I'm going to quit asking. I'm going to be thankful and content where you have me. And I went into my boss's office and I said, I just want to let you know I'm very thankful for being able to work here and just want to let you know I'm not looking around for other jobs. I really appreciate working for you. And he was kind of surprised. He's like, well, okay, good. Thank you. He didn't know what was going on in my heart. So we settled it. Okay, we're done asking in March. And so we knew one of the, we were working back at Wayside, helping out with the 2 to 3 year old kids teaching Sunday school. And one of the little kids' grandparents owned a cabin on the property out at His Hill here. So we inquired and said, is there any way we could just get out of the city and stay at the cabin? And he said, sure. So this is in May. We come up and we swing through the gate at His Hill just to see who we might see and say hello. And Charlie is coming out of the chapel, walking down the sidewalk. And he says, oh, Brian, Regina, so good to see you. We were just talking about you guys and wanted to know if you wanted to come on staff. But I got to go. So, we were in shock. We had no idea what to do. So, of course, now I'm confused. The Lord said no all this time. Now He's saying, here's an opportunity. So we did the same thing we've always done. We conversed with, godly people that we knew, and everybody was affirming, yes, this is a good thing. And so I went back into my boss's office in May, and I said, I remember when I said I'm not looking for other jobs? Well, actually, the Bible school that I went to, they've asked me to come on staff, and I believe this is what the Lord has. And he said, well, Brian, he says, I'm not going to throw you a party then when you leave this time. And I said, I understand. I understand. And so then the partner of the business came to me on the side, and he says, Brian, what are they going to pay you? And I said, I don't know. I never asked. And he, not being a believer, he just couldn't wrap his mind around, how can you say yes to something you don't even know what they're going to pay you? And I said, well, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working at a place that we're investing in people's lives for eternity. And that's the reason why I'm saying yes. And that's what we're doing. It's not about the money, and God's going to take care of us. He said, well, Brian, I could probably talk to Kevin, the other partner, and we could bring you on as a partner in the business.
Wow.
So we can have you don't have to bring an investment. You just be a partner, and your pay raise will be substantially higher. And I said, well, thank you so much, but this is really what the Lord wants for us. And so I said, thank you, but no. And so we came on in August of 99, and we came onto the campus. We came on as staff members, and everybody left because it was the end of summer camp. So we were literally here by ourselves. It was a nice welcome. It was kind of comical.
So that was, so you guys were here by yourself for, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
so
while everybody was on vacation.
Everybody was on vacation. We came here and we were like, okay, we're by ourselves.
Do you remember the first thing that you guys did with us as staff?
No, I do not.
Okay, that year is the year that Sheila also came on staff as our cook.
Oh,
and Charlie took a whole staff down to the coast for a few days.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that was the infamous fishing trip.
Oh, my. It's ingrained in our minds.
Charlie took us on a deep sea fishing trip, and the skipper of the boat told him to make sure that they all take, it was some kind of medication for
Dramamine or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But it had kick to it that would make sure to protect us from being seasick. So he gave it all to us the night before, and we just about I barely made it to my bed. I mean, I was seriously about to drop right there on the floor. And then the next morning, I staggered in because we had to get up early in the morning. I staggered into the dining room where we were all to meet, and I saw Charlie's giving everybody another pill, and everybody's sitting there with their head down. I mean, everybody's just about to drop, and just not thinking. Every one of us took the pill, and so now we're driving out to I think it was Port Aransas to get on the boat, and that was the hardest trip I remember driving. Just to stay awake. Then we get on the boat and we get out there 20 miles offshore, and it's smooth as glass. And there was no waves, and we're also sleepy. We ended up going into the cabin and going to sleep, and nobody caught any fish.
We were very glad when the boat said, well, everybody reel in. We're like, yay. And we'd take all the seats up. Nobody could sit down because we were all passed out.
We're laying down in the seats. So that was the introduction to being on staff.
Yep.
Yeah, that we've laughed about that for years. There's something else that I remember early on with you and me. Do you remember us getting our bus license?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Many fun stories about that.
Nobody on staff had bus license, and we used the buses year round. So Herb and you and I had to get our bus license. But the crazy thing about it is that you and I, Herb had bus license before. He had driven buses before. You and I never had. So we go through the whole process, and it was quite the process to go through and get it. I think we had 3 different exams to take, and you and I got our license the day before the mission trip to Mexico.
Right.
And so Charlie basically said, "Congratulations, you got your license. Now take the students to Mexico." So here we are, having never driven these buses other than just practicing to get the license. And now we're taking the whole student body to Mexico. And both of us had accidents in Mexico.
Oh, yes.
I think mine by far outdid yours, but as far as damage, but yours, I remember there was just a backup of traffic that was unbelievable. And then at the end of the week, we were leaving and we got lost in the town and ended up on a one-way street that we couldn't make a right-hand turn. And so we had to get students to jump off the bus and literally pick up cars and move them up onto the sidewalk so I could drive past and you behind me. And then they put all the cars back on the road.
Right.
Well, and then remember the trip home.
Oh yes. So then so I'm trailing behind Kelly, and all of a sudden there's this bang, and the windshield fills up with water, and I just get on the radio to the handheld radio to tell Kelly, hey, tell the students don't be throwing water balloons out the window. And just as I'm about to say that, I look over and the temperature gauge is pegged to the far right, 220. And I said, Kelly, pull over. And that was too late. It was gone. The entire radiator split from the top to bottom, no more water, and the engine seized up, and there it died. And so we've got all these students, 2 bus full of students, and so we very brightly and wisely said, okay, everybody pile onto one bus. And everybody's standing room only overloaded this bus. And we made it to Lytle, I believe it was, to HEB before one of the tires blew. And so then, of course, they're bringing a tire from His Hill, and so we're waiting. And so,
Brian and I could give you story after story. We were on staff together for 14 years, and we had a lot of laughs. Yeah. But tell us about your time on staff. How did the Lord, work in your heart with that time? It's 14 years, wasn't it? No. We were together 14 years. You were here for 20, right?
20 years, pretty much. And so, the Lord was, I was in charge of the maintenance, and I had a great group of guys that were support with me. And part of the great time was to also have our discipleship group ministry. So I would meet with 2 to 3 guys, and I like to kind of inwardly joke and say, well, some of 3 of the guys on staff came through my discipleship group. They had nothing to do with me, but Connor and Kevin, and I think Michael was in my group for a little bit as well. Anyways, so it was good that they're here. But nonetheless, so the Lord was using me to just kind of invest in the guys' lives, and just the fellowship with the other staff was just sweet, and really enjoyed it. And so it was, for me, it was a great time just to there was the normal day-to-day routine of just getting up and fixing whatever broke that day, and
because you were head of maintenance,
right? So I was head of maintenance, and so didn't really have an agenda each day other than just see what broke and fix it, and hope that something didn't break when you didn't know it was going to break, and so. Okay. So, but I really enjoyed the times with my disciples group, especially just working with these guys and get to know them better, and having those Fridays where you could, and even during the week at times, but specifically on Fridays, of just really imparting any kind of wisdom that the Lord would give to me to give to them.
Okay. And so you were here for 20 years, and then the Lord moved you guys on from here.
It was probably about 5 years prior to when we left. I was getting older. I was thinking to myself, when we first came on staff, I think I was 27, and something around there, 27, 28. And so I thought, well, we're going to die here. We're going to work here till we die. Yeah. Or till the Lord returns. And so, and the Lord said, okay, you can think that way for right now. That's fine. But probably about 5 years prior to us leaving, I started to sense that, this isn't where the Lord has me forever. But I didn't know what the next step was. And it wasn't for anything that was here at His Hill or anything. It was more of just what the Lord was working in my heart, and kind of thinking forward as well. Again, this is 15 years later, so I'm 15 years older, and I'm starting to think, I'm starting to ache a little bit longer. I'm not as spry as I used to be. I still can do what I'm doing, but what happens when I'm 55? What happens when I'm 65? And I can't expect that His Hill would keep me on staff as head of maintenance, doing maintenance work if I'm an old man, for better lack of words. And so I was thinking, well, what would the Lord have next that would be, for Regina and I to move into? And by this time we have had Anna and Joshua, our lovely kids, and something that would be able to support them. And because the Lord was amazing in our time here. He always provided in ways that was just abundantly beyond what we could even imagine. And He still does to this day. But, and so we just started praying about it, but we didn't know what was next. And so, of all things, the boomerang came back of Kelly and Arlene, Lawrence and Kelly Fernandez came down, and she is a realtor up in Canada, and they came down to visit with their kids, wanted to show them His Hill, and so she mentioned what she did, and so I thought, in the back of my mind, you know what, that sounds like something that I could probably look into. I think I might be able to do that. And the Lord said the same thing to Regina. She was thinking about it as well. And so we visited with Kelly and Lawrence, and they went on back to Canada. And and I said, Regina, she mentioned something about being a realtor. What do you think about that? She said, I was thinking the same thing. And so, again, following true to what the Lord always has me do, I conferred with friends and family and those who know the Lord, and they all said, I think that's something that would be a good idea. And I got the good, the bad, and the ugly of what that looks like, and how that, financially, what you need to prepare for something like that. So I went to Charlie, and I said, Charlie, I think the Lord's kind of leading me in this direction. What do you think? And he graciously said, Brian, I would love for you to be able to stay here as long as you want, but if this is what the Lord's leading you to, I don't see any reason why that would be a bad thing for you to do. And it meant a lot for me to have His blessing on it. So I said, I'd like to have a 2-year transition, if you're okay with that, transferring into real estate. And he said, sure, no problem. And I had grandiose ideas. I said, well, I can, work full-time for His Hill, and evenings and weekends I'll work in real estate until I started studying the courses. And it's 180 hours of course credit, followed by a state and national exam in order to get your real estate license. And so I quickly realized day one, well, that's not going to work. So before I got my test taken, I went back to Charlie and said, I think if it's possible, would you be open for me to work part-time, and I'll do the other part-time in real estate? And he said, yes, I'd be glad to do that. And so that's how the Lord transitioned us into the real estate market and serving people in a different way, and working part-time at His Hill. And His Hill graciously had a gift for our family that they gave for those who were leaving staff. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that. And so it was amazing that the Lord used that exactly to get us through what everybody said you need to have reserves on hand to cover your bills. And so the Lord used that. And probably about a year and a half later, it wasn't a full 2 years, we said, the Lord is firmly established on our feet. I believe we can go ahead and move on. And there was other staff here, Mark and Levi, in maintenance, and they knew just about everything I knew as well. And so it was a good time to go ahead and transition fully. And
so now you are full-time. You're a real estate agent, and my family's real estate agent. The Lord, you put up with us for quite a while. We're in Louisiana trying to move out here, and Brian did all the legwork. There was lots of FaceTime videos, and we thought this would work, and that didn't work. And we thought this was going to work, and that didn't work. And we'd drive out here to look at another house. Okay, this is definitely it, and that didn't work. And Brian just was just very patient, very faithful, and then the Lord just used Brian to find a home in Comfort that wasn't even on the market. And the family that owned it gave us such favor. It was a real blessing from the Lord. And now my whole family, they were able to buy the land. My kids were able to buy the land behind us, 2 different lots. So we all live next door to each other, and the Lord used you to do that. And it was a big blessing to us. And so, we just thank the Lord and rejoice with you that He's moved you to the next thing.
Yes.
And still, we see, you have a heart for the Lord, and you're probably learning, just like we are, is that your business is your ministry, because you're not. He's nodding his head, by the way. Just because you no longer are on staff at a Bible school, in that kind of community doesn't mean that you're no longer in ministry. But there's so much opportunity, that we're finding in the business world to proclaim Christ, to demonstrate Christ, to encourage people in what is true that's found in Christ. And you probably have had, lots of opportunity, working with people in real estate, because I know that can be a very, what's the best word for it? For people that are buying, it can be a very anxious time. It can be a very stressful time, and there's probably lots of opportunity for you to just minister to people, to take a breath and just rest.
That's right. And that's exactly right, because it gives great opportunity to say, I just want to let you know I'm praying about this with you, and the Lord's got this, and just those little phrases that the Lord gives opportunity at times to interject. Even if we haven't had that conversation, if they know the Lord or not, but it's a great segue or opening. I was just with a gentleman today, and I told him my past of being here at the Bible school, and it led one thing to another, and he said, I don't know. He says, it seems kind of odd, but I feel like, when I'm telling you these next things, that I can trust you because you're a Christian. I said, yes, I am a Christian. I'm a believer in Christ. And he said, yeah, exactly. So, and I've never met this man before until today. And so, again, it's just another way of being, salt and light in our world.
Right, yeah. And I, just this whole conversation, I don't know if you caught this, if you were intending to do this, but there's really been, there's been a theme through this. And, we were texting each other. You were wanting to know, do I have any questions? And people ask me that all the time. I said, not really. It's just going to be a conversation. And, just how you came to know the Lord and what the Lord's doing in your heart. And as you were telling your story, I noticed something that was being repeated. First of all, you never knew what the next step was.
Yeah.
But you were trusting the Lord for the next step. And he was making it possible, and he was making it known as to what to do. And, sometimes we have to, we don't realize that until we look back.
Right.
And see, the Lord was doing this and doing this and doing this. And, that goes back to the theme of, the His Hill podcast, to fix your eyes on Jesus.
Right.
To be with Him, to abide in Christ. Jesus told us to seek first His kingdom. I know you need these things, He said. That's my paraphrase. I know you need these things. The Gentiles, the non-believers, they need these things, and they eagerly seek after them. But you seek me. And, Brian, I think that's just a great encouragement to give our listeners to be fixed, as we always say, be fixed on Jesus. You don't know what tomorrow holds. It has enough worries of its own.
Right.
Jesus says. But to be with Him, to ask Him, to trust Him, and to keep moving forward, trusting Him.
Yeah.
And I look at your life and I say that's what you've done. I've known you since you were a young man, and that's what you've done. You keep moving forward, you keep seeking Him, And, that's, and we can look back on it and say, thank you, Lord.
Yes.
Amen. And you have a wonderful family. For a short time, you have your 2 kids at home with you. One just got back from a couple of years up at Timberline.
That's right.
Or just over a year. And now the other one's about to leave to go to Timberline. Is that correct?
Well, he's shifted his plans,
Okay.
kind of like what I was. He said, well, Dad, it might be that I'm kind of be like you. I think I'm going to go in and study electrical trade.
Okay.
And then maybe the Lord later on would do that.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we're at with him. But it was, at one point, it was something on his radar.
So those of you who know the Stamness family, you know Anna, you know Josh, now you know what they're up to. And Regina is working at a school, plus she's also licensed realtor, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you guys have a new home in Bernie.
That's right.
Is Bernie the mailing address?
It is. Bernie is the mailing address, but it's in Bear County.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's right on the edge of all these counties coming together.
Yeah, and we were part of the crowd that was helping you guys move into the place. It's a nice place, and we're really excited for you guys. And Brian, you and I have been members at the same church now for, my goodness, except for the 6 years we were gone.
It was, I remember it, basically I came on staff and then I went to church there and they said, okay, you need to be a deacon. And I said, okay. And that's pretty much, I've been in it since 1999 as well.
All right. Yeah, so Brian and I get to see each other a lot on weekends at the church, and then every once in a while we do something together. But, Brian, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate you being willing, because this is only audio, nobody knows what time it is, but this is 7:00 in the evening. Brian was working with a client in Fredericksburg, and on his way home he stopped by to do this. Now you've probably heard, I'm going to edit it as much as I can, but you've probably heard a lot of coughing going on.
Sorry about that.
Brian's I usually have water here, don't have it this time, and Brian's been in pain over there. We've paused the recording a few times, and he's been taking mints and drinking what he can get, but he got through it. Brian, I appreciate you doing that. You're a good friend, and we want to encourage people that have listened to this to just think about the story that Brian's given. That we don't always know the next step. We don't, and aren't you glad you don't? Because I remember going through the same thing one time and just not knowing what I should do. I was out of Bible college and looking for my first position. Couldn't find anything. Called my former youth pastor up. We met in a Denny's. And I just looked at him with frustration. Arlene was there with us. And I said, Del, why won't God tell me what to do? I mean, we're sitting by a window, there's shrubs outside. I said, why won't he light this bush up and just tell me what to do? I'll do it. I want to know what you have. I'll do it. It's not like he hasn't done something like this before. And my former youth pastor, Dale Morgan, he said, Kelly, it's interesting that you say that, because God could light that bush up. He could tell you what he wants you to do. But the problem is, by the time your hand touches the front door to leave this place, you will already have a plan as to how you are going to achieve God's will in your life. Mm-hmm. And I thought, yep, Hebrews chapter 11, it wasn't until Abraham was as good as dead that God made him the father of a multitude. Mm-hmm. And, we all need to come to that point where we recognize that God is God. He is sovereign. I am not. Christ is my life. I am not my own life. Apart from him, I can do nothing. John chapter 15. It's only from that place that we can live not knowing what the next step is, because we know the one who does know. And he's faithful. He never leaves. He never forsakes. So I thank you for the testimony. I thank you for sharing these truths, really, just in telling your story. So thank you very much for being here, Brian.
Thank you, Kelly. It's truly an honor that you asked me to do this, and a blessing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the His Hill podcast. You've been listening to our host, Kelly Doherty, and the Hill's previous maintenance manager, Brian Stamness. We hope you appreciate hearing from him today. We have filled up for the upcoming Bible school year, and summer camp is pretty full as well. Please keep us in your prayers as we lead this summer and prepare for another year of Bible school in the fall. And if you'd like to pray for rain to hit the Lone Star State, that would be wonderful too. Remember to keep your eyes fixed on Christ Alumni. He is our firm foundation, and with him we can stand secure. Again, thank y'all so much for tuning in with us this week to another episode of the His Hill Podcast. I'm Lizzie, and we'll see you next week.